The music was still playing when the humiliation began. In the center of a glittering engagement party in Dakar, Fanta Cisse stood beside a towering cake, her engagement ring catching the bright chandelier light. Guests held champagne glasses, smiling for photos until Moussa Ndiaye suddenly raised his voice. "Everyone," he announced calmly, "there has been a small change." A strange silence fell across the room. Then he pulled Awa Tisse, Fanta's own sister, closer to his side. "The woman I'm marrying is Awa." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones lifted instantly. Some people even laughed. Fanta didn't move. Her mother leaned toward her and whispered coldly, "Don't embarrass this family." And near the doorway, a quiet man in simple clothes, Ibrahima Diallo, watched everything with unreadable eyes.
Before the story continues, tell me in the comments what country are you watching from and what time is it there right now. And if you enjoy powerful stories about justice, resilience, and unexpected destiny, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
Fanta Cisse had learned early that dignity was something you carried inside you because the world could strip you of almost everything else. In Dakar, dignity didn't come from the cut of your dress or the shine of your phone. It came from whether you could still stand tall when the city decided to look through you like you were invisible. She lived in Parcelles Assainies in a small two-room apartment with peeling paint and a window that never truly closed. In the rainy season, the wind pushed dampness through the cracks, and Fanta would wake up to find her clothes faintly wet on the line. Still, she woke before sunrise every day, tied her headscarf carefully, and stepped out with a quiet seriousness that made people trust her, even before she spoke. At 27, she wasn't the kind of woman who chased attention. She wasn't loud in the way some women in the city had to be just to survive. Fanta's strength was steadier than that, like a river that kept moving, even when rocks tried to stop it. She worked as an administrative assistant for a logistics company near Plateau, handling invoices, shipments, calls from impatient clients, and the constant chaos of a city that never truly slowed down. Her salary wasn't large, but she managed it with discipline. She paid rent. She bought groceries. She sent money to her father's younger brother in Kaolack, who had taken in Fanta's cousin after their aunt died. And she helped her mother. Her mother, Ibrahima Diallo, lived not far away in a crowded family compound where every adult carried invisible stress like a second shadow. Ibrahima was the kind of woman who measured love in sacrifices. She believed family reputation was a shield against poverty, and she held that shield with both hands, even if it cut into her palms. Fanta understood her mother's fear. In Dakar, one scandal could ruin a woman in a single afternoon. A rumor could close doors before you even knocked. Still, Mariama's love had always come with sharp edges. Fanta's sister Awa Tisse was 2 years younger and built differently, not in body but in hunger. Where Fanta moved through the world with careful dignity, Awa moved like someone who believed life owed her more. She was charming in public, quick with compliments, quick with laughter. People loved her because she made them feel important. But at home, Awa's eyes often lingered on Fanta's life like she was counting what belonged to her. "You act like you're better than everyone," Awa would say, sometimes leaning against the doorway while Fanta folded laundry. "I don't," Fanta would reply quietly, refusing to argue. Awa would scoff. "Then why are you always the one Mama praises when people come around?" Fanta never answered that either. She had long realized that envy didn't need logic. It only needed opportunity. And opportunity had arrived in the form of Moussa Ndiaye. Musa was everything Dakar respected. He wore tailored suits even on casual days. His wristwatch alone could pay someone's rent for a year. He drove a black SUV that looked like it belonged to a minister. People didn't ask questions about men like him. They assumed success had always been his birthright. He was 32 and already had a rising name in the business world: real estate, imports, investments, the kind of words that made older men nod approvingly. When he walked into a room, even people who pretended not to care would adjust their posture. Fanta met Musa through work. Her company handled shipments for one of his projects, and he came to the office one afternoon when a delivery was delayed. Most clients shouted or threatened. Musa didn't. He stood at the reception desk, calm as if he owned the building too, and asked politely, "Who is responsible for this account?" Fanta stepped forward, heart steady. "I am." He looked at her, really looked, then nodded. "Fix it, please." There was no insult in his voice, no disrespect, just expectation. She fixed it. Not because she feared him, but because she took pride in her work. After that, he began to appear more often, sometimes for business, sometimes for reasons that felt less clear. He asked her questions that weren't about shipping schedules. He asked where she grew up, if she liked the ocean, whether she ever took time to rest. At first, Fanta stayed guarded. Men with money often mistook kindness for weakness. But Musa was patient, and he was careful with his words. When he finally asked her out, he didn't do it with a show. He said, "I've been watching the way you carry yourself. I'd like to know you outside this office if you'll allow it." Allow it. The word made her pause because it sounded like respect. So she said yes. Their first date was at a quiet restaurant in Almadies, where the sea breeze softened the city noise. Fanta wore a simple dress and felt out of place among the polished tables and expensive perfume. But Musa made her feel seen. He asked her opinions. He listened. He didn't act like her background was a stain. As weeks turned into months, Musa became a presence in her life, calling at night, sending a driver sometimes when she worked late, inviting her to events where people looked at her with curiosity. And the more Musa's attention settled on her, the more her family's attention changed too. Mariama began to call more often, her voice suddenly warmer. "My daughter, are you eating well? Are you saving money? Remember, a man like that does not come twice." Awa's behavior changed, most of all. At first she acted supportive, too supportive. She wanted every detail, where they went, what he said, what gifts he gave. "Bring him to the compound," Awa insisted one afternoon. "Let people see you're serious. Let them respect you." Fanta hesitated. "Musa is busy." Awa rolled her eyes. "Busy men still make time for what they value. Or are you afraid of what?" Fanta wondered. But she eventually agreed to a family meeting. Musa came wearing a simple kaftan instead of his suit, greeting elders with proper respect. He spoke carefully, offered gifts, and promised serious intentions. The older women smiled. The men nodded. Mariama glowed that day like someone whose prayers had finally been answered. After Musa left, the compound buzzed with gossip. Some women congratulated Fanta. Others whispered, trying to measure her worth against his wealth. Fanta pretended not to hear. That night, when she returned to her apartment, she allowed herself to dream quietly, cautiously. Maybe life was turning. Maybe her years of carrying burdens would finally lead somewhere soft. 3 months later, Musa proposed. Not with fireworks or a crowd, but in his car parked near the corniche, the ocean stretching dark behind them. He held a ring box and said, "Fanta Cisse, I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" Her throat tightened. She remembered her father gone since she was 19, taken by a sickness they couldn't afford to treat properly. She remembered her mother's fatigue, her cousin's needs, her own loneliness in a city full of people. And she said yes. When she told Mariama, her mother cried, not gentle tears, but the kind that sounded like relief. "This is God," Mariama said. "This is our breakthrough." Awa hugged her too, laughing loudly. "My sister will be Madame Ndiaye. You see, our family is rising." But when Fanta looked into Awa's eyes, she saw something she couldn't name. It wasn't joy. It was sharp, like a hunger that had finally found a direction. Fanta tried to ignore it. Engagement preparations moved quickly. Musa wanted a big celebration, more like a statement than a gathering. It would take place at an elegant venue, in Plateau, filled with business associates, society, women, and family elders. It was the kind of event people posted online, the kind that made strangers say, "That's the life." Fanta didn't care for display, but Musa insisted. "It's not just about us," he said. "It's about showing people I'm serious." Her mother insisted too. "Let them see who you are marrying," Mariama said. "Let them see you are chosen." So Fanta allowed herself to be swept into the preparations. She bought fabric for a traditional outfit. She saved money for makeup and hair. She practiced smiles in the mirror, not because she was vain, but because she didn't want to look ungrateful in front of people who already doubted her. Still, something inside her remained uneasy. In the days before the engagement party, Musa became harder to reach. His calls became shorter. His texts became delayed. When she asked if everything was okay, he replied, "Business stress. Don't worry." Awa, on the other hand, was suddenly everywhere offering to help with Fanta's outfit, insisting they go together for fittings, taking photos and posting them online with captions that felt strangely possessive. One evening, Fanta entered her mother's compound unexpectedly and found Awa on the phone in the corner whispering. When Awa saw Fanta, she ended the call quickly, smiling too wide. "Who were you talking to?" Fanta asked, trying to sound casual. Awa shrugged. "A friend." "What friend?" Awa laughed like Fanta had told a joke. "Ah, Fanta, you ask too many questions. Relax. You're about to marry a rich man. Enjoy it." Fanta forced a small smile, but her stomach tightened. That night she lay in bed in her apartment, listening to the far-off hum of Dakar traffic. She stared at the ceiling and tried to calm her thoughts. Maybe she was just nervous. Maybe she was letting old fears ruin a good thing. But then her phone buzzed. A message from Musa. "We'll talk tomorrow. Everything will be fine." No heart emoji, no my love, no reassurance, just that. Fanta turned onto her side and pressed the pillow against her chest. She whispered to herself, "It will be fine." Yet even as she said it, her body didn't believe her. On the afternoon of the engagement party, Dakar shone under bright sunlight. The city looked beautiful from a distant blue sky. Moving cars, people dressed in color. Fanta sat in a salon chair while a stylist braided her hair and pinned gold accessories carefully. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked her phone. No messages from Musa. Her mother had already called twice, rushing her. "Don't be late. People are coming. The photographer is here." Awa had sent voice notes. "Sister, I'm so excited." Hurry, Fanta breathed in slowly and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like a bride, already elegant, glowing, serious. She wanted to feel happy. She wanted to feel secure. When she left the salon, she stepped into the heat and raised her face toward the sky, like she was asking God directly for protection. And as she climbed into the taxi, heading toward Plateau, a single thought refused to leave her. If this is truly my breakthrough, why does it feel like I'm walking into a storm? The engagement venue in Plateau glittered with the kind of wealth that made people whisper. Tall glass doors reflected the sunset over Dakar, and inside soft golden lights poured down from crystal chandeliers. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved between tables carrying trays of sparkling drinks. Music floated through the room, smooth jazz mixed with the quiet murmur of conversations about business deals and investments. This was not the kind of place where ordinary heartbreak happened. Yet that night, heartbreak was about to become the center of the room. When Fanta Cisse stepped inside, the noise softened for a moment. Heads turned not because she was famous, but because she carried herself with a quiet dignity that drew attention without trying. Her dress was deep emerald green, tailored simply but elegantly. Gold earrings framed her face, and the braids in her hair were decorated with tiny beads that caught the light when she moved. For a second, she allowed herself to breathe. Maybe the unease she had felt all week had been nothing more than nerves. Guests approached her quickly, some with genuine warmth, others with curiosity. "Congratulations, Fanta. You're marrying one of Dakar's most promising businessmen." Your life is about to change. Fanta smiled politely, thanking each person though her eyes kept searching the room. Where was Moussa Ndiaye? She spotted her mother first. Ibrahima Diallo stood near a group of older women wrapped in a bright patterned bubu, her posture straight with pride. When Ibrahima saw her daughter, her face lit up. "My daughter," she said, hurrying over. "You look beautiful. Come greet the elders." Fanta kissed her mother's cheek. "Have you seen Musa?" Ibrahima waved a hand lightly. "He is with his business partners. Men talk too much when money is involved. Don't worry." Fanta nodded, though the tight feeling in her chest didn't disappear. Then she saw Awa. Her sister stood near the stage where the engagement speeches would take place. Awa wore a gold dress that shimmered with every movement. Her makeup was flawless. Her smile was bright. Too bright. When their eyes met, Awa raised her hand and waved enthusiastically as if everything in the world was perfect. Fanta walked over. "You look different tonight," Fanta said carefully. Awa laughed. "Different good or different bad, different confident." "Of course." Awa tilted her head. "Tonight is important for the family." The way she said it felt strange. Fanta studied her sister's face. There was excitement there, but not the kind you felt for someone else's happiness. It was the kind you felt when something belonged to you. Before Fanta could ask anything else, the music softened. A man from the event company stepped forward with a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced warmly, "thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate the engagement of Moussa Ndiaye and Fanta Cisse." Polite applause filled the room. Fanta felt a nervous flutter in her stomach. She glanced around again for Musa. Still not there. The announcer smiled, and now the groom-to-be would like to say a few words. Heads turned toward the stage. A moment later, Moussa Ndiaye appeared. He walked forward in a perfectly tailored navy suit, his shoes shining under the lights. His posture was relaxed, confident exactly, the way people expected a man like him to appear. But when his eyes met Fanta's across the room, something felt wrong. There was no warmth, no smile, just a calm that made her pulse stumble. Musa took the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," he began. The crowd murmured greetings. He continued, his voice smooth. "I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. Many of you have supported my journey in business, and tonight was meant to celebrate an important step in my personal life." Fanta's hands folded tightly in front of her. Meant to celebrate. The words sounded strange. Musa paused, scanning the room. Then he said something that changed everything. "However, there has been a small change." A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. Fanta blinked slowly. What change? Musa's gaze moved to someone standing a few steps away. "Please," he said calmly. "Come here." Fanta followed his eyes, and her heart stopped. Awa Cisse stepped forward. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Fanta's mind struggled to understand what she was seeing. Awa walked confidently toward the stage, her gold dress catching the light. When she reached Musa, he placed a hand gently at the small of her back. The gesture looked intimate. Too intimate. Fanta felt the air leave her lungs. Musa smiled slightly. "The woman I will be marrying," he said clearly into the microphone, "is Awa Cisse." Gasps exploded through the room. Someone dropped a glass. Phones lifted instantly as whispers turned into excited chatter. "What did he say? Isn't Fanta the fiancé? Waitawa is her sister." The words flew through the air like sparks. Fanta didn't move. She stood where she was, her body frozen while the world tilted around her. On stage, Awa leaned closer to Musa, slipping her arm through his as if it had always belonged there. Musa continued calmly as though explaining a simple business decision. After careful thought, I realized that Awa and I are more compatible. In life, you must choose the partner who truly fits your future. Some people laughed softly. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A woman whispered loudly, "This is a scandal!" Fanta's ears rang. She could hear everything and nothing at the same time. Her gaze moved slowly across the room. Some guests avoided looking at her. Others stared openly, their faces filled with curiosity. It was the look people gave when watching drama unfold on television. Her mother stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. Fanta Mariama whispered urgently, "Don't embarrass this family." The words cut deeper than the betrayal. "Embarrass," Fanta repeated quietly. Mariama's eyes flicked toward the watching crowd. "Just leave quietly." Fanta turned her head back toward the stage. Musa was still speaking. "Awa understands the life I live," he was saying. "She understands the responsibilities and expectations of my position." The implication hung heavy in the air. "Fanta does not." Someone near the front chuckled. "Poor girl," another voice murmured. Fanta felt heat rush to her face. Her throat tightened, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of people who would turn her pain into entertainment. She lifted her chin slightly. Then she began to walk. Every step across the polished floor felt like moving through water. Conversations quieted as she passed. A few guests stepped aside awkwardly. No one tried to stop her. No one defended her. When she reached the glass doors, the cool evening air rushed over her skin. For the first time since Musa spoke, she could breathe again. But breathing didn't stop the shaking in her hands. She walked down the steps slowly, her vision blurred. Then a voice spoke softly beside her. "Excuse me." Fanta turned. A man stood near the entrance, holding a small bottle of water. He wore simple clothes, a faded shirt, dark trousers. He looked like someone who worked deliveries or maintenance, someone who blended into the background at events like this. But his eyes were steady. "Take this," he said gently. Fanta hesitated. "I'm fine. You're not the man," replied calmly. He held the bottle out again. After a moment, Fanta took it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she twisted the cap open. The man didn't ask questions. He didn't stare the way others had. He simply stood nearby, giving her space. After a few seconds, Fanta whispered, "Thank you." The man nodded once. Inside the venue, laughter rose again as the celebration resumed. Only now it was celebrating someone else. Fanta closed her eyes briefly. The man spoke again. Sometimes he said quietly, "People reveal who they are when they think no one important is watching." Fanta looked at him. "Who are you?" she asked. He gave a small smile. "My name is Ibrahima Diallo." The name meant nothing to her. Just a stranger who had shown more kindness in 30 seconds than anyone inside that building. Fanta looked back at the glowing venue, one last time. Inside, her sister stood where she had once been, meant to stand, beside the man who had promised to marry her. The humiliation settled heavily in her chest, but somewhere beneath the pain, another feeling was beginning to rise. Not revenge, not yet, something quieter, something stronger. And though she didn't know it yet, the quiet man standing beside her, the one everyone assumed was poor, had just stepped into the most important chapter of her life. The night air, outside the engagement hall in Plateau, felt strangely cold, even though Dakar was still warm. For a long moment, Fanta Cisse stood on the pavement staring at the glowing windows of the building behind her. Through the glass she could see shadows, moving guests, laughing waiters carrying drinks, music continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if someone's life had not just shattered in front of them. She gripped the bottle of water Ibrahima Diallo had given her and forced herself to take a slow breath. The water tasted faintly metallic, but it steadied her trembling throat. Inside the hall, applause erupted. Fanta flinched. "Are you okay?" Ibrahima asked quietly. His voice held no curiosity, only concern. Fanta let out a short breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "No," she admitted. Silence stretched between them. Cars passed on the street headlights, sliding across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a motorbike revved loudly. Dakar moved forward the way cities always did, indifferent to individual heartbreak. Fanta finally turned to face him. "You should go back inside," she said. "If you work here, they might be looking for you." "I don't work for the venue," Ibrahima replied calmly. "Oh." Fanta didn't ask more. Her mind felt too heavy for questions. After a moment, she handed the empty bottle back to him. "Thank you for the water." "You're welcome." Another silence followed. Then Fanta straightened her shoulders. "I should leave. Do you have a ride?" She shook her head. "I came by taxi." Ibrahima looked at the busy street. "It might take time to find another one here." Fanta almost said it didn't matter, but the truth was, she didn't have the energy to stand alone on the roadside while drivers ignored her. Before she could answer, a yellow taxi slowed near the curb. Ibrahima stepped forward and raised his hand. The driver stopped. He opened the back door and gestured gently. "After you." Fanta hesitated. "You don't have to." "It's fine," he said. "Everyone deserves to leave a place like that with dignity." The word dignity settled softly in her chest. She slid into the seat. Ibrahima closed the door and leaned toward the window. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Parcels Assanis." The driver nodded. As the taxi pulled away, Fanta glanced back once through the rear window. The engagement hall glowed like a jewel against the night sky. Inside it, her sister was probably standing where she had been meant to stand, and the man she had trusted was smiling for photographs. Fanta turned away from the view and pressed her forehead lightly against the cool glass. For the first time since the announcement, tears finally slipped down her cheeks. She didn't cry loudly, just quietly. The next morning arrived far too quickly. Fanta woke up with swollen eyes and the heavy ache that comes after emotional exhaustion. For a moment, she stared at the ceiling of her small apartment, unsure if the night before had truly happened. Then her phone buzzed. A message notification. Another, and another. Her stomach tightened. She picked up the phone slowly. Her social media notifications were exploding. Photos from the engagement party had already begun circulating online. In one photo, Moussa Ndiaye stood proudly beside Fanta Cisse, both smiling while guests applauded. The caption read, "Businessman Moussa Ndiaye announces surprise engagement to Fanta Cisse at glamorous Dakar celebration." Below the post, the comments poured in. Wait, wasn't he engaged to her sister? What a scandal. Maybe the first sister wasn't good enough. Fanta dropped the phone onto the bed as if it had burned her. Her chest felt tight again. Within minutes, the phone rang. "Mama." Fanta stared at the screen before answering. "Hello." Mariama's voice came sharp and urgent. "Where did you go last night?" Fanta blinked. "You told me to leave quietly." "Yes, but you disappeared without greeting the elders. People are talking." Fanta sat up slowly. "Mama." Musa announced he was marrying Awa. "Yes." The word landed like a stone. "You say it like it's nothing." Mariama sighed impatiently. "These things happen." Fanta stared at the wall in disbelief. "These things happen." Mariama lowered her voice. "You should have handled it more gracefully." Gracefully, Fanta whispered. "Yes. Instead, you ran away and made people think something was wrong." Fanta let out a hollow laugh. Something was wrong. Mariama's tone hardened. "Listen to me carefully. Musa is an important man. If he decided Awa was the better match, that is his right. We cannot afford enemies. The words felt like knives, so my humiliation protects the family. You are being dramatic. Fanta closed her eyes. I have to go, Mama. Wait, Mariama said quickly. You should come to the compound later. Awa wants to talk. Fanta's eyes opened again. Awa. Yes, she said she wants peace between you. Peace. Fanta felt a bitter taste in her mouth. I'll think about it. She ended the call before Mariama could reply. For a long time she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Outside the neighborhood slowly came alive, vendors calling out children, running past buses, rumbling down the street. Life kept moving, but inside her chest everything still felt broken. Eventually she stood and went to the small sink in the corner. She splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Her eyes looked tired, but there was something else there too. A quiet anger. She dressed quickly and stepped outside. The morning sun was already strong. Fanta walked without direction for a while, letting the city noise drown out the thoughts spinning in her mind. She passed market stalls, fruit sellers, mechanics repairing motorbikes. Normal life. People arguing over prices. People laughing. None of them knew the humiliation she had endured the night before. And strangely, that anonymity felt comforting. After almost an hour of walking, she stopped near a small roadside cafe where workers were eating breakfast. She ordered coffee and sat on a wooden bench. Just as she lifted the cup to her lips, a familiar voice spoke nearby. Good morning. Fanta looked up. Ibrahima Diallo stood a few steps away. He wore the same simple clothes as the night before, dark trousers, a plain shirt and worn shoes. In one hand he carried a small paper bag. For a second, Fanta was too surprised to speak. You. He smiled slightly. I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Fanta blinked. You followed me. No, he said calmly. I come here often for breakfast. He held up the paper bag. The bread here is good. Fanta studied him for a moment. You saw everything last night. Yes. And you still came to say hello. Yes. She shook her head slightly. Most people would pretend not to know me today. Ibrahima sat down on the bench across from her. Most people are afraid of embarrassment, and you're not. Fanta took another sip of coffee, feeling strangely calmer. After a moment she asked, why were you even at that event? Ibrahima opened his paper bag and tore off a piece of bread before answering. I was delivering something to someone inside. What kind of delivery? He shrugged lightly. Just paperwork. Fanta nodded slowly. She didn't push further. Instead, she asked, did you always give water to strangers after public humiliations? A faint smile touched his lips, only when they looked like they need it. Fanta exhaled softly. For the first time since the night before, the tightness in her chest loosened slightly. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Ibrahima spoke again. What will you do now? Fanta stared at the steam rising from her coffee. I don't know. That was the honest truth. Her life had been carefully built around a future that had disappeared in a single sentence. Ibrahima nodded thoughtfully. Then maybe he said the first step is simply standing up again. Fanta looked at him. You make it sound easy. It isn't, he admitted. But it's possible. Fanta considered his words. Across the street, the city continued its endless rhythm. Maybe she couldn't control what Musa had done. Maybe she couldn't control what people were saying about her. But she could control one thing. Whether she stayed broken. Fanta set down her coffee cup and straightened her shoulders slightly. For the first time since the engagement disaster, she felt the smallest spark of determination. And though she didn't realize it yet, the quiet man sitting across from her, Ibrahima Diallo, was about to become the unexpected ally who would change everything. In Dakar, news traveled faster than the ocean wind. By the third day after the engagement disaster, almost everyone who moved within the same social circles as Moussa Ndiaye seemed to know the story. But like most stories told by strangers, the truth had already been twisted into something unrecognizable. Some versions said Fanta Cisse had been too poor for Musa's ambitions. Others said Musa had discovered something about Fanta that made him change his mind. A few cruel rumors even suggested that Fanta had tried to trap Musa into marriage. None of those stories were true. But truth was rarely the loudest voice in a city full of gossip. That morning, Fanta sat at her small desk in the logistics office, where she had worked for nearly 4 years. The hum of computers and ringing phones filled the room as usual, but something had shifted. People looked at her differently. Not openly rude, not exactly, just careful. 2 co-workers who usually joked with her every morning were whispering near the printer. When they noticed her watching, they suddenly stopped talking. Fanta pretended not to notice. She focused on the invoices in front of her, typing numbers into the system with steady hands. Work had always been her anchor. As long as she could concentrate on tasks, she could keep her emotions locked away. But around mid-morning, her supervisor appeared beside her desk. "Fanta," he said quietly, "can you come to my office?" Her stomach tightened. Of course. Inside the small glass-walled office, the supervisor closed the door gently. His name was Mr. Ba, a middle-aged man who usually spoke with straightforward kindness. But today, his expression looked uncomfortable. "Please sit." Fanta sat slowly. Mr. Ba cleared his throat. "You know our company works with many high-profile clients." "Yes, one of those clients is Moussa Ndiaye." Fanta's chest tightened again. "Mr." Ba avoided her eyes. "He called yesterday." Silence. "What did he say?" Fanta asked. Mr. Ba sighed. "He suggested that your presence here might create complications for the business relationship." The words felt carefully chosen. Too carefully. Fanta understood immediately. "He wants me gone." Mr. Ba didn't answer, which was answer enough. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "The directors believe it would be best if you took some time away." "How long? A few months?" Fanta gave a short laugh that held no humor. "A few months is the polite way to say never come back." Mr. Ba looked genuinely sad. "You've been a good employee, but not valuable enough to challenge a rich client." He said nothing. Fanta stood slowly. "I understand." Mr. Ba hesitated. "We will pay 1 extra month of salary. Thank you." She turned and walked out of the office before he could see the tears burning in her eyes. Outside the building in Plateau, the midday heat pressed down heavily. Fanta walked without direction, at first trying to process what had just happened. In less than a week, she had lost a fiancé, her reputation, and now her job. All because Moussa Ndiaye had decided she was no longer useful. She stopped at a street corner, gripping her bag tightly. For a moment, anger surged through her chest. Not loud anger, cold anger, the kind that settled deep and refused to disappear. She whispered to herself, "He thinks he can erase me." The thought made her straighten her back. No, he had taken enough already. She would not let him take her dignity, too. Still, dignity didn't pay rent. Fanta spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the city looking for job openings. Shops, offices, small companies everywhere, she asked the same question. "Are you hiring?" And everywhere she received the same polite answer. "We will call you." But their eyes said something else. "We know who you are." By late afternoon, exhaustion settled into her bones. Her feet carried her almost automatically toward the small roadside cafe where she had met Ibrahima Diallo the day before. She didn't know why. Maybe because it had been the only place recently where someone had treated her like a human being. instead of a scandal. When she arrived, the cafe looked just as ordinary as before. Plastic chairs, wooden tables, the smell of grilled bread and coffee. And sitting on the same bench as yesterday was Ibrahima. He looked up as she approached. "You look tired," he said calmly. Fanta dropped onto the bench across from him. "I lost my job." Ibrahima studied her face carefully. "Musa." She nodded. "He called my company." Ibrahima leaned back slightly, absorbing the information. "I see." Fanta rubbed her temples. "I thought humiliation was the worst part," she said quietly. "But apparently he wants to make sure my entire life collapses too." Ibrahima remained silent for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you have savings a little? Maybe 2 months of rent?" And after that, Fanta gave a small shrug. "I'll figure something out." The cafe owner approached and placed 2 cups of coffee on the table. "I didn't order," Fanta said. "I did," Ibrahima replied. She stared at the cup. "You shouldn't spend money on strangers. You're not a stranger anymore." The simple statement caught her off guard. Fanta wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "You're very calm," she said, after a moment. "If someone destroyed your life like this, would you be calm too?" Ibrahima's gaze drifted briefly toward the busy street. "I've had difficult experiences," he said quietly. "But you don't seem angry." "Oh, I know anger," he replied softly. "I just learned that anger is only useful when it moves you forward." Fanta looked at him carefully. "You talk like someone who has lived many lives." A faint smile crossed his face. "Perhaps." They sat in silence for a while. Then Ibrahima spoke again. "You said you're good with organization and logistics." "Yes." "And numbers." "Yes." "What about running something small?" "Your own operation." Fanta blinked. "My own business, even a small one." She laughed lightly. "With what capital? That problem can sometimes be solved." Fanta looked at him suspiciously. "You're not secretly rich, are you?" Ibrahima chuckled quietly. "No." She studied his worn shirt and simple shoes. "Yes, I suppose not." But something about his calm confidence still puzzled her. He continued. "A friend of mine owns a small distribution warehouse near the port. He sometimes needs someone organized to help manage shipments." Fanta's eyebrows lifted. "You could introduce me, I could ask." "Why would you do that?" Ibrahima shrugged. "Because I believe people should have second chances." Fanta looked down at her coffee. For the first time in days, a fragile thread of hope appeared. "Thank you," she said softly. Across the city, however, Fanta Cisse was enjoying a very different version of the story. At a fashionable boutique in Almadies, she stood before a mirror, trying on a diamond bracelet Musa had just bought her. "Perfect, Musa," said, admiring the reflection. Awa smiled. "I told you everything would settle down." "Fanta will fade away," Musa replied confidently. "People always forget quickly." Awa tilted her head. "Still, she's stubborn." Musa laughed. "She has no power." Awa looked back at the mirror, watching the diamonds sparkle. "You'd be surprised," she murmured. But for now she felt victorious. The wealthy fiancé, the admiration, the future she had always wanted. Meanwhile, across the city, Fanta sat in a small cafe drinking coffee with a quiet man everyone assumed was poor. Neither of them realized yet that the paths of their lives were beginning to intertwine in ways far bigger than anyone expected. And the story that Dakar believed was already finished, had only just begun. The following week unfolded slowly for Fanta Cisse, like someone learning to walk again after falling hard. Losing her job had left a silence in her life that felt strange at first. For years, her days had been structured by office hours, spreadsheets, and deadlines. Now the mornings stretched long and uncertain, and the rhythm of Dakar's streets became the only clock she had. Still, she refused to collapse. Each morning, she woke early dressed neatly and stepped outside as if she still had somewhere important to be. Pride, she had learned long ago, was sometimes the only shield left when everything else had been stripped away. And more often than not, her steps eventually carried her back to the small roadside cafe where she had met Ibrahima Diallo. It was not a fancy place, just a few plastic chairs beneath a faded canopy, the smell of coffee and grilled bread drifting into the street. But something about its simplicity felt safe. On most mornings, Ibrahima was already there. Sometimes he arrived with a small notebook, sometimes with a bag of bread he shared casually with the cafe owner. He never seemed rushed, never seemed worried, even though his clothes suggested a life far from comfortable. When Fanta approached that morning, he looked up from his cup. "You're early today," he said. "So are you," she replied, sitting across from him. He nodded toward the street. "Traffic starts sooner every year." Fanta smiled faintly. For a moment they watched the city wake up together. Motorbikes weaving through buses, street vendors arranging fruits, children in school uniforms running past with backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. Normal life. Something Fanta had begun to appreciate more deeply now. "Did you hear from your friend about the warehouse job?" she asked. Ibrahima took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "I spoke with him yesterday, and he would like to meet you." Fanta's heart lifted slightly. "When tomorrow morning?" Relief spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said sincerely. Ibrahima waved the gratitude away lightly. "You'll earn the job yourself. I only opened the door." Fanta leaned back in her chair. "Still," she said, "it means something." A comfortable silence followed. Then Fanta glanced at him curiously. "What about you? What about me?" "You're always here," she said, "but I never see you working anywhere." Ibrahima smiled faintly. "I do small tasks. What kind? Deliveries, errands, helping people when they need something organized." Fanta studied his calm face. "You seem too thoughtful for simple errands." He laughed softly. "That's a compliment, I think." "Maybe." But something about him still puzzled her. He listened carefully when she spoke. He asked questions that made her think. Sometimes his advice sounded almost strategic, like someone used to solving complicated problems. Yet his clothes remained simple, his lifestyle modest. It didn't add up. Still, Fanta chose not to push. Trust, she knew, grew slowly. And in truth, Ibrahima's quiet presence had already begun to change something inside her. For the first time since the engagement disaster, she no longer woke up feeling completely alone. The next morning, Dakar's harbor district buzzed with activity. Cargo trucks rumbled past the port gates, workers shouted instructions, and the smell of salt water mixed with diesel fumes. Fanta adjusted the strap of her bag as she followed Ibrahima toward a modest warehouse building near the docks. "You've been here before?" she asked. "A few times." They entered through a large metal door, where crates were stacked neatly along the walls. Inside, a stocky man in his 40s sat behind a wooden desk, reviewing paperwork. When he saw Ibrahima, he stood immediately. "Ibrahima." His voice carried warmth and respect. They shook hands firmly. "This is Mamadou Sar Ibrahima," said, turning to Fanta. "He owns the warehouse." Mamadou smiled. "And this must be the woman you told me about." Fanta blinked. "You spoke about me already." Ibrahima nodded casually. Mamadou gestured toward a chair. "Sit. Let's talk." For the next 30 minutes, Mamadou asked detailed questions about Fanta's experience managing shipments and documents. She answered honestly, explaining how she had handled logistics coordination at her previous job. When she finished, Mamadou leaned back in his chair thoughtfully. "You understand the work," he said. Fanta waited nervously. "The pay is not high," he continued. "But if you help me organize things properly, the business could grow." "That's fine," she said quickly. Mamadou nodded. You can start next week. Fanta blinked. Really? Yes. Relief rushed through her body so suddenly she almost laughed. Thank you. Mamadou smiled. You should thank Ibrahima. I trust his judgment. Fanta glanced at Ibrahima. He simply shrugged as if it were nothing. Meanwhile, across the city in Almadies, life looked very different. Inside a luxurious seaside restaurant, Moussa Ndiaye and Fanta Cisse sat at a table overlooking the ocean. Awa scrolled through her phone with satisfaction. The engagement photos are everywhere, she said. Musa sipped his drink. Good publicity. Awa tilted her head. Some people are still talking about Fanta. Musa shrugged dismissively. Let them talk. You don't think she might cause problems? Musa chuckled. With what power? Awa smiled slowly. I suppose you're right. But deep inside, something unsettled her. She had expected Fanta to collapse completely after the humiliation. Instead, her sister had simply disappeared from public view. And sometimes silence was more dangerous than noise. Back at the warehouse, Fanta and Ibrahima stepped outside into the bright sunlight. Fanta let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. I can't believe that worked. You did well, Ibrahima said. You helped. You earned it. She turned to face him fully. I don't know why you're being so kind to me. Ibrahima's expression softened. Because someone once helped me when I needed it. Fanta studied him carefully. What happened to you? He hesitated briefly. Life, he said simply. She wanted to ask more, but something in his tone suggested the story was not ready to be told. So she nodded instead. Well, she said, now I owe you lunch. He raised an eyebrow. You don't owe me anything, I insist. After a moment, he agreed. They walked toward a small restaurant near the port, the salty breeze blowing across the harbor. For the first time in weeks, Fanta felt something close to normal again. She had work, she had purpose, and unexpectedly, she had someone beside her who believed she could rebuild. But across Dakar, other forces were already beginning to move. For men like Moussa Ndiaye, power was not something they surrendered easily. And sooner or later, Musa would discover that Fanta Cisse had not disappeared after all. When that moment came, the fragile piece she had begun to rebuild would face its next test. But for now, under the bright West African sun, Fanta allowed herself a small moment of hope. She had fallen, but she was standing again, and this time she would not stand alone. The warehouse near the Dakar port smelled of salt cardboard and engine oil. For Fanta Cisse, the scent quickly became something else, entirely opportunity. Her first week working with Mamadou Sarr began with confusion. Papers were stacked in uneven piles, shipment logs were incomplete, and drivers came and went without clear instructions. Some deliveries arrived late, others were misplaced, and Mamadou's frustration showed in the way he rubbed his forehead each afternoon. But chaos was something Fanta understood how to tame. By the third day, she had reorganized the shipment records into simple categories. She created a schedule for incoming cargo labeled storage sections and convinced the drivers to sign delivery confirmations before leaving the port. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest work. And every evening when she returned home, tired but purposeful, Fanta felt something inside her, slowly rebuilding. The humiliation of the engagement party still lingered like a shadow, but it no longer defined every moment of her day. One afternoon, Mamadou watched her from across the warehouse floor as she checked inventory numbers. You know, he said thoughtfully, I should have hired you months ago. Fanta smiled faintly. I'm glad you didn't. Otherwise, I might never have learned how strong I am. Mamadou chuckled. And Ibrahima was right about you. At the mention of that name, Fanta glanced toward the open door. As if summoned by the thought, Ibrahima Diallo stepped inside a few minutes later. He wore the same simple clothes as always, carrying a small folder under his arm. "Good afternoon," he said calmly. Mamadou greeted him warmly. "Your friend here is saving my business." Ibrahima glanced at Fanta. "I knew she would." Fanta felt a quiet warmth at the words. Over the past week, Ibrahima had continued appearing regularly, sometimes bringing documents for Mamadou, sometimes simply stopping by to check how things were going. Yet he never interfered with her work. He observed, and occasionally offered advice that was strangely insightful. That afternoon, while Mamadou stepped outside to speak with a driver, Ibrahima leaned lightly against a crate. "How is the first week?" busy Fanta replied. "But good. Good busy or exhausting busy both." He nodded approvingly. "You look different. How less heavy?" Fanta paused, considering the truth of that. "Maybe because I'm focusing on something that belongs to me again." "Work can do that," Ibrahima said. She studied him for a moment. "You seem to understand business better than someone who only runs errands." Ibrahima gave a small smile. "I observe. Observe what patterns?" Fanta tilted her head. "Patterns in people," he explained. "In decisions. In how small problems grow into big ones." She crossed her arms. "That sounds suspiciously like management." He chuckled. "Maybe I missed my calling." Fanta laughed softly. It felt good to laugh again. But the moment was interrupted when Mamadou returned with a serious expression. "We have a problem." Fanta's smile faded. "What kind of problem?" Mamadou placed a document on the desk. "This shipment here," he said, pointing to the paper. "One of our biggest clients just canceled the contract." "Canceled?" Fanta frowned. "Why?" They didn't give a clear reason. She scanned the document carefully. The client name made her stomach tighten. Ndiaye Construction Group, Musa's company. Fanta felt the familiar chill of recognition. "He's doing this because of me," she said quietly. Mamadou looked uncomfortable. "You know him?" "Yes." Mamadou sighed heavily. "That contract represented nearly half our monthly income." Fanta lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry." Mamadou shook his head. "You didn't cancel the contract." He did. Still, the guilt settled heavily in her chest. Ibrahima stepped closer to examine the paper. "Did he give any explanation at all?" he asked. "None." Ibrahima studied the document for a moment longer. Then he looked at Fanta. "What exactly was your role in Musa's business?" Before all this, Fanta hesitated. "I helped organize some shipment plans for materials he imported. You designed the system, part of it, and he used that system in his company." "Yes." Ibrahima nodded slowly. "Interesting." Fanta frowned. "Why?" But before he could answer, Mamadou spoke again. "If more clients follow his lead, this warehouse could collapse." Fanta looked up. A familiar determination stirred inside her. "No," she said quietly. Mamadou raised an eyebrow. "No, we won't let it collapse." She turned toward the desk and pulled out the shipment records she had been organizing all week. "You still have smaller clients," she said. "Yes, but they're not enough." "Not yet," Fanta replied. Ibrahima watched her carefully. "What are you thinking?" Fanta spread several papers across the desk. "We expand." Mamadou blinked. "With what money?" "With efficiency," she said firmly. She pointed to the shipping schedules. "Right now you're handling 10 clients badly. What if we handled 20 clients well that would require more drivers?" "Not necessarily. We optimize routes." Mamadou looked skeptical, but Ibrahima's eyes lit with quiet interest. "Go on," he said. Fanta continued explaining how they could restructure delivery routes, reduce wasted trips, and attract smaller businesses that couldn't afford large logistics companies. It wasn't a revolutionary idea, but it was practical. By the time she finished, Mamadou leaned back thoughtfully. "That might actually work." Ibrahima smiled faintly. "Of course it will. Fanta raised an eyebrow. You're very confident. I've learned to trust good ideas. For a moment, the tension in the warehouse eased, but across the city, Moussa Ndiaye was having a very different conversation. Inside his sleek office tower overlooking Dakar's skyline, he sat behind a polished desk while a business associate scrolled through shipment reports. You canceled the warehouse contract, the associate asked. Yes. Why, Musa leaned back in his chair. Because the woman who works there used to be my fiancé. The associate laughed. That's personal. Business is always personal. And if the warehouse fails, Musa shrugged, another competitor disappears. The associate nodded slowly. Efficient. Musa glanced toward the city below. Somewhere out there, Fanta Cisse was trying to rebuild her life. He imagined her struggling, embarrassed, powerless, and the thought satisfied him. But what Musa didn't know was that the quiet man who had helped Fanta find that warehouse job was already watching the situation closely. And unlike Musa, Ibrahima Diallo understood something important about power. Sometimes the strongest forces in life moved quietly, and sometimes the person everyone underestimated was the one preparing the biggest change. Back at the warehouse, the sun began to set over the harbor. Fanta finished organizing the last shipment log and looked up to see Ibrahima watching her thoughtfully. What she asked, "You're stronger than you think." Fanta smiled faintly. I didn't have a choice. Ibrahima shook his head. Strength is always a choice. For a moment, their eyes met, and though neither of them realized it, yet the partnership forming between them was about to challenge forces far larger than a broken engagement. Because when truth and patience worked together, even powerful men could fall. The idea of marriage had once been something beautiful in Fanta Cisse's mind. When Moussa Ndiaye first proposed to her beside the dark waves of the Corniche, she had imagined a future filled with quiet stability, a home, respect, a life built slowly but securely. Now the word marriage felt heavier. It carried memories of betrayal, humiliation, and the sound of strangers laughing while her world collapsed. Yet life had a strange way of moving forward even when the past tried to anchor it in place. Over the next several weeks, Fanta threw herself into work at Mamadou Sarr's warehouse. The idea she had proposed about expanding smaller delivery routes began to show results. New clients trickled in, small construction suppliers, market distributors, importers who preferred reliable service over flashy corporate contracts. The warehouse grew busier. Drivers began trusting her schedules. The stacks of crates moved more efficiently. Mamadou no longer rubbed his forehead every afternoon. You've changed this place, he told her one evening as they closed the office. Fanta smiled faintly. I just organized what was already there. But even as her professional life slowly stabilized, the tension with her family worsened. She had avoided returning to the compound since the engagement scandal. But one afternoon, her phone buzzed repeatedly, with calls from Ibrahima Cisse. Reluctantly, she answered. Fanta, you must come home tonight, her mother said immediately. Why, there is something important. Fanta hesitated. Is Awa there? Yes. The word alone filled her with resistance. Still, Ibrahima insisted, and eventually, Fanta agreed. That evening, she walked into the familiar courtyard of the family compound with cautious steps. Several relatives sat outside chatting, but their conversation stopped when they saw her. Some nodded politely. Others simply watched. Fanta felt their curiosity pressing against her like heat. Inside the main house, Awa Cisse sat on the couch beside Moussa Ndiaye. The sight made Fanta's chest tighten, but she forced herself to remain calm. Mama said you wanted to talk, she said. Ibrahima gestured for everyone to sit. This family cannot continue living in conflict, she began. Awa crossed her legs elegantly. Yes, she said smoothly. We should clear the air. Fanta folded her arms. I'm listening. Awa leaned forward with a practiced smile. Musa and I are planning our wedding soon. Fanta said nothing. Awa continued. But people still ask questions about the past. It would help everyone if you publicly supported our marriage. Fanta stared at her. You want my support, yes. After what you did, Awa's smile tightened slightly. You're making it sound dramatic. Fanta felt anger rise, but she kept her voice steady. You stood on a stage and took the man who was supposed to marry me. Musa spoke for the first time. Let's not exaggerate, he said calmly. I simply chose the partner who fits my life. Fanta looked at him slowly. And you want me to congratulate you? Awa sighed as if she were dealing with a difficult child. No one is asking for drama. Just a simple statement so people stop gossiping. Mariama nodded firmly. It would protect the family's reputation. The words felt painfully familiar. Fanta stood. My humiliation was not enough. Mariama frowned. You're being stubborn. No, Fanta said quietly. I'm being honest. She turned toward the door. Congratulations on your wedding. And she walked out before anyone could stop her. Behind her, Awa's voice called sharply. You'll regret this pride someday. But Fanta didn't look back. Later that night, she sat at the small cafe where she had come to feel safe. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and the hum of evening traffic softened the air. Ibrahima Diallo arrived a few minutes later carrying 2 cups of tea. You look troubled, he said. Fanta sighed. My sister wants me to publicly support her wedding to Musa. And will you? Ibrahima nodded calmly. That sounds wise. Fanta stared at the steam rising from her cup. Sometimes I wonder if pride will destroy my life. Why would dignity destroy anything, he asked. Because refusing powerful people has consequences. Ibrahima leaned back slightly. Yes, he admitted. It does. Fanta studied him. You always say things like, you understand power very well. He smiled faintly. Power is easy to understand. How people behave when they believe they have it. Fanta thought about Musa standing confidently on that stage weeks earlier. Yes, she murmured. A quiet moment passed. Then Ibrahima spoke again. What do you want for your future, Fanta? She hesitated. Peace and respect. And she considered the question carefully. Someone who sees me as an equal. Ibrahima nodded slowly. That's not too much to ask. Fanta laughed softly. It seems like a lot in this city. He studied her face thoughtfully. Then he said something unexpected. Marry me. Fanta blinked. What I said, marry me. She stared at him in disbelief. You're joking. I'm not. The street noise faded into the background as her mind struggled to process the words. Why would you say that? Because you deserve a partner who stands beside you, not above you. Fanta shook her head. Ibrahima. We barely know each other. That's true. And marriage is not a solution to humiliation. No, he agreed. But partnership can be a foundation for rebuilding. She studied his calm expression carefully. You're serious? Yes. Fanta looked down at her hands. Her life had already collapsed once because she trusted the wrong man. Was she really considering another marriage so soon? I don't want pity, she said quietly. This is not pity. Then what is it, respect? He replied simply. She met his eyes. There was no manipulation there, no arrogance, just quiet certainty. Still, the idea felt impossible. People will say I married a poor man because I lost a rich one, she said. Ibrahima shrugged. People will always say something. Fanta laughed softly at the truth of that. But marriage requires trust. Yes, and I don't know your whole story. That's fair. He paused, then added gently. But sometimes trust grows after a decision, not before. Fanta sat silently for a long moment. The city lights flickered around them. Her past had been shaped by humiliation. Her present was fragile. Her future was uncertain. And yet sitting across from her was the one person who had never treated her like she was less. Finally, she spoke. If we did this, it would be simple. Of course. No big ceremony. I prefer that. And honesty, she added firmly. If we build something together, it must be real. Ibrahima nodded. Agreed. Fanta exhaled slowly. Then with surprising calm she said the words she never expected to speak again, so soon. Okay. For the first time that evening, Ibrahima looked slightly surprised. You're sure no, she admitted honestly. But I'm willing to try. A small smile appeared on his face. Then we'll figure the rest out together. Across Dakar, lights from expensive villas and modest homes shimmered against the dark Atlantic horizon. In one part of the city, Fanta Cisse was preparing for a glamorous wedding to a powerful man. In another part, Fanta Cisse had just agreed to marry someone everyone assumed was poor. To outsiders, it looked like the final proof that Fanta had fallen far from the life she once almost had. But hidden beneath the surface of that decision was a truth no one yet understood. Because the quiet man she had just agreed to marry was not who the world believed him to be. The wedding between Fanta Cisse and Ibrahima Diallo happened so quietly that most of Dakar never heard about it. There were no chandeliers, no photographers, no luxury venue overlooking the Atlantic. Instead, the ceremony took place in a small municipal office on the edge of the city where couples signed papers beneath a slow-turning ceiling fan while a clerk stamped documents with practiced boredom. Fanta wore a simple cream dress she had bought from a local market. Ibrahima arrived in a clean but modest suit, dark gray, neatly pressed but clearly not expensive. Two witnesses stood beside them, Mamadou Sarr and the cafe owner who had unknowingly become part of their story. The entire ceremony lasted less than 15 minutes. When the clerk pushed the marriage certificate across the desk, Fanta paused before signing. Her pen hovered over the paper for a moment. Not because she doubted the decision, but because life had taught her that moments like this could change everything. She glanced sideways at Ibrahima. He met her eyes calmly, offering the same steady presence he had shown since the night her world collapsed. No pressure, no performance, just quiet certainty. Fanta signed. A moment later, Ibrahima did the same. The clerk stamped the paper and slid it back. "Congratulations," he said automatically. Outside the building, Mamadou clapped Ibrahima on the shoulder. Well, he laughed. This might be the simplest wedding Dakar has ever seen. Fanta smiled softly. That's exactly what I wanted. The cafe owner handed them a small box. Sweet bread, he explained proudly. For celebration. They all laughed lightly. There were no speeches, no dramatic vows. Just four people standing in the warm afternoon sunlight sharing bread and tea. And strangely, Fanta felt more peaceful than she had expected. Their new home was a small rented apartment, not far from the port. It was simple. 2 rooms, a narrow kitchen, and a balcony that overlooked a noisy street where motorbikes buzzed late into the night. But for Fanta, it represented something important. A fresh beginning. The first evening after they moved in, she stood in the kitchen preparing rice while Ibrahima assembled a small table they had purchased from a second-hand furniture shop. "You're good with tools," she said. "I've had practice with fixing things." Fanta glanced at him. "Furniture among other things." She smiled slightly. Over the next few weeks, married life settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Every morning they woke early. Fanta went to the warehouse. Ibrahima left shortly afterward, often saying he had errands or meetings related to deliveries. In the evenings, they met again at home, sharing simple meals while talking about their days. Unlike her past relationship with Musa, there was no tension over status or expectations. Ibrahima, never tried to control her decisions. He listened when she spoke about the warehouse and offered thoughtful advice when she asked. Sometimes he even helped her review shipping schedules at the kitchen table. "You think like a strategist," she told him one evening. "Maybe I just like solving puzzles." Fanta laughed softly, but there were moments when something about him puzzled her. One night she woke in the middle of the night to find the other side of the bed empty. She stepped onto the balcony quietly. Ibrahima stood outside, speaking on the phone in a low voice. "I told you the timeline must change," he said calmly. "No, not yet. We'll handle it soon." When he noticed her watching, he ended the call quickly. "Work?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "What kind of delivery happens at midnight?" He smiled faintly. "Sometimes problems don't wait for morning." Fanta accepted the explanation. But the question lingered in her mind. Another time she discovered a leather folder inside his bag while searching for a pen. Inside were several documents printed on thick, expensive paper. One page contained detailed financial projections for a company she had never heard of. At the bottom of the page was a signature line. Ibrahima Diallo, Executive Director. Fanta frowned. When Ibrahima returned home that evening, she asked about it. "Oh," he said casually. "A friend asked me to review something. You're reviewing corporate documents for friends, now I help where I can." His answer sounded reasonable, yet something about it still didn't fully make sense. Meanwhile, across Dakar, preparations for Cisse's wedding were becoming more extravagant every day. Inside a luxury boutique, Awa stood before a mirror, trying on a heavily embroidered wedding gown, while two assistants adjusted the fabric. "How does it look?" she asked. "Magnificent," one assistant replied. Awa smiled at her reflection. She imagined the photographs already herself, walking down a decorated aisle beside Moussa Ndiaye, surrounded by society figures and business elites. A wedding everyone in Dakar would talk about. Her phone buzzed with a message. A rumor circulating online caught her attention. Someone had posted that Fanta Cisse had quietly married a poor delivery worker. Awa laughed. "Musa," she called. He walked into the room. "What is it?" She showed him the phone. "Look." Musa read the message and chuckled, so she found someone even lower than herself. Apparently. Awa tilted her head thoughtfully. "Do you think she did it to prove something?" Musa shrugged. "She married a poor man because she had no better options." Awa smiled slowly. Good. Yet something about the news unsettled her slightly. Fanta had always been stubborn, too proud. And sometimes pride could turn into determination. Back at the small apartment near the port, Fanta sat on the balcony, watching the sunset over the distant harbor cranes. The sky burned orange and red, reflecting off the ocean far beyond the buildings. Ibrahima joined her a moment later with 2 cups of tea. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "I've been thinking about what our life." He sat beside her. "And it's peaceful. That's good." "Yes," she agreed, "but sometimes I feel like there's more to your story than you've told me." Ibrahima remained silent for a moment. "Everyone has parts of their life," they reveal slowly. Fanta nodded. "I understand that." She turned to face him. "But I trust you, and I trust you," he replied. Their eyes met. The air between them carried an unspoken promise that whatever secrets existed would eventually surface. But for now, peace was enough. Yet neither of them knew that forces were already gathering beyond their quiet apartment. Because men like Moussa Ndiaye did not easily forget those who had once been close to them. Sooner or later, Musa would learn more about the quiet marriage between Fanta and the man everyone believed was poor. And when that day came, the fragile balance of their new life would face its greatest test yet. The small warehouse near the Dakar port had never been busier. 3 months after Fanta Cisse joined Mamadou Sarr's logistics business, The once disorganized operation had transformed into something surprisingly efficient. Crates were labeled, clearly delivery routes, ran on tight schedules, and new clients continued to appear: small importers, market suppliers, and construction merchants who needed reliable transport but couldn't afford the giant logistics companies dominating the city. For Mamadou, the change felt almost miraculous. "You've doubled my business," he told Fanta one afternoon while reviewing the monthly accounts. Fanta shook her head modestly. "We just organized things properly." But the numbers told a different story. What had once been a struggling warehouse was slowly becoming a stable enterprise. Drivers respected Fanta's schedules. Clients trusted her communication. Even the port workers had begun greeting her by name. For the first time in months, her life felt steady. Yet stability had a way of attracting attention. One morning, as Fanta reviewed incoming shipments, Mamadou approached her desk with a concerned expression. "Someone came asking about you earlier." Fanta looked up. "Asking about me?" "Yes. Who? A man in a suit. He didn't give his name." A familiar unease stirred in her chest. What did he want? "He asked if a woman named Fanta Cisse worked here." "And what did you say?" "I said yes." Fanta leaned back slowly. And then Mamadou sighed. He left. Fanta's stomach tightened. She didn't need to guess who had sent him. Across Dakar, inside a sleek office tower overlooking the city skyline, Moussa Ndiaye sat behind his polished desk, listening to a report. "So she works at a warehouse near the port," the investigator finished. Musa leaned back thoughtfully. "Running logistics operations." "Yes." The investigator placed a file on the desk. "And she recently married." Musa raised an eyebrow. "To who?" "A man named Ibrahima Diallo." Musa smirked. "Diallo. What does he do?" "Unclear. No major business records under that name, so he's nobody." "Most likely." Musa laughed softly. "Interesting." The investigator waited. "Continue monitoring," Musa said finally. "I'm curious how long her little rebuilding effort will last." That evening, Fanta returned home, feeling unusually tired. Their apartment near the port glowed softly under the yellow streetlights outside. Inside, the smell of cooking spices filled the air. Ibrahima stood in the kitchen stirring a pot. "You're late today," he said. Work was busy. She placed her bag on the table and sank into a chair. After a moment, she said quietly, "Someone came looking for me at the warehouse." Ibrahima glanced over his shoulder. "Who?" "A man in a suit." Ibrahima's expression remained calm. "Did he say why no?" "But you suspect Musa?" "Yes." Ibrahima nodded slowly. "That would make sense." Fanta studied him carefully. "You're not surprised?" "No." "Why men like Musa rarely forget people they once controlled." The word "controlled" made her flinch slightly. "You think he still sees me that way?" "Yes." Fanta stared down at the table. "I wish he would just move on." "Powerful people don't move on easily," Ibrahima said gently. "They like closure." "What kind of closure, Victory?" Fanta sighed. "I already lost everything." Ibrahima placed 2 plates of food on the table and sat across from her. "You didn't lose everything." She gave a small, tired smile. "I lost my fiancé, my reputation, and my job, and gained independence, resilience, and a husband who respects you." Fanta laughed softly. "That sounds like something from a motivational speech." Sometimes motivational speeches contain truth. They ate quietly for a few minutes. Then Fanta asked the question that had been lingering in her mind. "Ibrahima, what exactly do you do all day?" He looked up from his plate. "I told you, small business errands, every day, usually, but you always seem to know things," she said. "About business strategies, contracts, legal problems." Ibrahima smiled faintly. "I read a lot. Reading doesn't teach you everything." "No," he agreed, "but it helps." Fanta studied him carefully. She had learned enough about people to recognize when someone avoided a question. But strangely, she didn't feel angry about it, only curious. "I suppose everyone has secrets," she said finally. "Yes," he replied quietly, "and someday you'll tell me yours someday." Fanta nodded. She could accept that answer for now. 2 days later, trouble arrived at the warehouse. A black SUV pulled up outside the building just before noon. 2 men in dark suits stepped out carrying official-looking folders. Inside the office, Mamadou frowned as they approached the desk. "Can I help you?" One of the men handed him a document. "We represent Ndiaye Construction Group." Mamadou's expression hardened immediately. "What do you want?" The man spoke calmly. "We are here regarding intellectual property concerns." Fanta looked up from the shipment logs. "Intellectual property." The man turned toward her. "You are Fanta Cisse, correct?" "Yes." He opened the folder and placed several documents on the desk. "Our client claims that the logistics system currently used by this warehouse was originally developed for Ndiaye Construction Group." Fanta stared at the papers. "That's not true." The man continued smoothly. "Our client believes you may have improperly reused proprietary planning structures from your previous employment." Mamadou slammed his hand on the desk. "That's ridiculous." But the man remained calm. "If the system continues to be used, our client will pursue legal action." The words hung heavily in the air. Fanta felt the cold hand of realization tighten around her chest. Musa. After everything he had already taken from her, he was now trying to destroy the one place she had managed to rebuild. Mamadou looked at her anxiously. "What does this mean?" Fanta swallowed. "It means Musa is trying to shut us down." The suited men gathered their papers calmly. "You have 7 days to respond," one of them said. Then they left. The warehouse fell silent. Mamadou ran a hand through his hair. "I can't fight a corporate legal team." Fanta stared at the door they had just exited through. The anger she had tried to bury for months began rising again. Not loud anger, cold anger. The kind that sharpened your focus. That evening she told Ibrahima everything. They sat together on the balcony while the port lights flickered in the distance. "He's trying to destroy the warehouse," she said. Ibrahima listened carefully. "And the accusation he claims I stole his logistics system. Did you?" Number Ibrahima nodded slowly. "Good." Fanta looked at him. "You sound very calm about this. Because problems have solutions, you're confident for someone facing a corporate lawsuit." Ibrahima smiled slightly. "Maybe I know more about these situations than you think." Fanta raised an eyebrow. "Oh, yes." He leaned back in his chair, watching the harbor lights. "For now," he said quietly, "let Musa believe he's winning." Fanta frowned. Why Ibrahima's eyes reflected the distant glow of the port cranes. Because sometimes the best way to defeat powerful men is to let them reveal their arrogance first. Fanta studied him carefully. For the first time since she had met him, she sensed something deeper beneath his calm exterior. Not just intelligence, authority, and though she didn't yet know the truth about the man she had married, one thing suddenly felt certain. Ibrahima Diallo was far more prepared for this battle than Moussa Ndiaye realized. The threat from Ndiaye Construction Group hung over the warehouse like a gathering storm. For the next 2 days, Mamadou Sarr barely slept. He reviewed documents late into the night, muttering calculations and shaking his head at the legal notice lying on his desk. "We cannot fight a company like this," he said repeatedly. But Fanta Cisse refused to accept defeat so easily. Every time she looked around the warehouse, the organized shelves, the drivers loading trucks with renewed confidence, the growing client lists, she felt something protective rise inside her. This place represented more than business. It represented her second chance. and she would not allow Moussa Ndiaye to destroy it simply because he still believed he owned her past. Still, the reality remained frightening. One evening after work, Fanta returned home carrying copies of the legal notice. She found Ibrahima Diallo sitting at the small table on their balcony reading a newspaper. "You look like someone preparing for war," he said calmly as she approached. "In a way, I am." She placed the documents in front of him. "Read this." Ibrahima took the papers and studied them carefully. His eyes moved slowly across the legal language, absorbing every detail. Fanta watched his expression closely. Unlike Mamadou's panic, Ibrahima's face remained composed. After a few minutes, he folded the document neatly and placed it back on the table. "This is weak." Fanta blinked. "Weak, yes." She leaned forward. "How can you say that? The accusation relies on the assumption that your logistics system belongs exclusively to Musa's company. It doesn't." "Exactly. But they have lawyers," she said. "And money." Ibrahima nodded. "Yes. But money cannot replace evidence." Fanta crossed her arms. "You sound very confident about legal strategy." He gave a small smile. "I've observed these things before. You keep saying that." Ibrahima stood and walked to the railing of the balcony. The evening breeze from the harbor moved gently through the air. "Tell me something," he said. "When you worked for Musa's company, did you sign any intellectual property agreement?" Fanta thought carefully. "No. No clause saying your ideas automatically belong to his company." "No." "Good." She watched him closely. "Why are you asking these questions like a lawyer?" He turned slightly, the faintest smile touching his lips. "Because understanding the battlefield helps you survive the fight." Fanta shook her head. "You're impossible to read." "Perhaps, but I trust you," she added quietly. Ibrahima looked at her for a moment. "And I won't let anyone destroy what you've built." The certainty in his voice sent a small wave of calm through her chest. The following morning, tension filled the warehouse. Drivers whispered near the loading docks while Mamadou paced near the office. "Did you find a lawyer?" he asked Fanta anxiously. "I'm working on it. But the deadline is approaching, I know." Just then the metal door opened. Ibrahima Diallo stepped inside. Mamadou greeted him immediately. "You came at the right time. We are in trouble." Ibrahima nodded calmly. "I heard." Mamadou threw his hands in the air. "They will bury us in court only if we panic." Ibrahima replied. Mamadou frowned. "What do you suggest?" Ibrahima glanced at the documents on the desk. "First we gather evidence. What evidence? Proof that the logistics structure used here is not proprietary." Fanta nodded slowly. "That makes sense," Ibrahima continued. "Second, we document Musa's pattern of harassment." Mamadou looked confused. "Harassment? Yes." Fanta's eyes widened slightly. "You mean the cancelled contracts and the investigation he sent to the warehouse," Ibrahima added, "and this legal threat." Mamadou scratched his head. "But how does that help us? Because courts take retaliation seriously." The warehouse owner blinked. "You talk like someone who has done this before." Ibrahima smiled faintly. "Let's just say I pay attention." Fanta watched him thoughtfully. The calm authority in his voice felt stronger today. Not just confidence, experience. Across the city, Moussa Ndiaye was enjoying what he believed was an inevitable victory. Inside a private lounge overlooking the ocean in Almadies, he sat with two business associates discussing upcoming construction projects. "Soon that little warehouse will disappear," he said casually. One associate chuckled. "You're ruthless." Musa shrugged. "Business is not for the weak, and the woman she'll learn not to challenge me." Another associate lifted his glass. "To power." Musa smiled. But power often created blind spots, and Musa had no idea that the quiet man helping Fanta rebuild her life was quietly collecting information of his own. 3 days later, another meeting took place in the small apartment near the port. Papers covered the kitchen table, shipment records, employment documents, old email exchanges. Fanta rubbed her temples. "This is exhausting." Ibrahima studied the documents calmly. "We're almost finished. You said that 2 hours ago." He smiled slightly. "Patience." Fanta leaned back in her chair. "Where did you learn to handle situations like this?" Ibrahima paused. For a brief moment, he seemed to consider telling the truth. But then he simply said, "Life experience." Fanta sighed. "One day I'll discover your secret." "Maybe." They returned to the documents. Eventually, Ibrahima placed one final paper on top of the stack. "That's enough." Fanta looked up. "Enough for what? To respond to Musa's legal team." She frowned. "You mean a lawyer will send this?" Ibrahima shook his head. "No." "Then who?" He met her eyes calmly. "I will." Fanta blinked. "You?" "Yes." "You're writing a legal response to a corporate law firm." "Yes." Fanta stared at him for several seconds. "Ibrahima, are you absolutely sure about this?" He nodded. "Very sure." She exhaled slowly. "Well," she said finally, "at this point, we don't have many options." Ibrahima sealed the documents inside a large envelope. "Trust me." Fanta watched him walk toward the door. Something about his posture had changed. He looked authoritative, almost like a man stepping back into a role he had not played for a long time. As the door closed behind him, Fanta leaned back in her chair. A strange thought crossed her mind. Who exactly did I marry? But the answer to that question was coming soon, because Moussa Ndiaye was about to receive a response he never expected, and when he read the name signed at the bottom of that letter, he would realize that the quiet man he had ignored from the beginning of this story was not a man to underestimate. 7 days. That was the deadline, written in bold letters at the bottom of the legal notice sent by NDI Construction Group. 7 days to respond. 7 days before Moussa Ndiaye's lawyers would file a formal lawsuit accusing Fanta Cisse and Mamadou Sarr's warehouse of intellectual property theft. For Mamadou, those 7 days felt like a countdown toward disaster. For Fanta, they felt like a test of everything she had rebuilt. But for Ibrahima Diallo, they were something else entirely. Preparation. On the morning of the deadline, Dakar woke under a sky washed pale blue by the Atlantic breeze. At the warehouse, tension hung thick in the air. Drivers moved more quietly than usual. Mamadou paced between stacks of crates, checking his watch every few minutes. "Did he send it?" Mamadou asked Fanta nervously. "Yes, and the lawyers received it." "Yes." Mamadou wiped sweat from his forehead. "And now we wait." Fanta nodded. Inside, however, her heart was beating faster than she allowed herself to show. The envelope Ibrahima had sent the previous evening contained not just a response to Musa's accusation, but something much stronger. Evidence. Emails proving that parts of the logistics structure had originally been developed independently before Fanta ever worked with Musa. Shipment models showing that the warehouse system had been significantly modified. And most importantly, documentation showing Musa's pattern of retaliation after the engagement scandal. If the case ever reached court, the evidence could turn Musa's attack into a legal disaster for his own company. Still, powerful men rarely lost easily. Across Dakar's financial district, inside a glass-walled office high above the city, Moussa Ndiaye sat at his desk while his legal advisor read the response letter. The lawyer's expression grew more serious with each page. "Where did this come from?" he asked finally. Musa leaned back confidently. "From the warehouse owner, I assume." The lawyer shook his head slowly. "No." "What do you mean, no?" The lawyer turned the final page toward him. "Look at the signature." Musa glanced down casually. At first he barely registered the name. Then his eyes narrowed. Signed at the bottom of the document were the words, Ibrahima Diallo Managing Director, Diallo Strategic Holdings. For several seconds, Musa said nothing. The lawyer continued reading. This letter references multiple legal precedents and includes documentation showing retaliatory business interference. Musa's jaw tightened. Diallo Strategic Holdings. Yes, that name sounds familiar. It should, the lawyer replied calmly. It's one of the largest private investment groups operating across West Africa. Musa sat up straight. What they control: logistics, port operations, infrastructure investments, and several shipping companies. The room suddenly felt smaller. And you're telling me that company's managing director is representing the warehouse? The lawyer closed the folder slowly. That appears to be the case. Musa stood abruptly and walked to the window overlooking Dakar's skyline. That's impossible. Is it? Musa's mind raced. He remembered the investigator's report mentioning a man named Ibrahima Diallo, married to Fanta. But the report had described him as a nobody, a delivery worker. How certain are you? Musa demanded. The lawyer slid another document across the desk, a printed corporate registry record. At the top of the page, Diallo Strategic Holdings, Executive Leadership. And there beside the company's founder's name was a photograph. The same calm face Musa had barely noticed standing near the doorway, the night of the engagement party. Ibrahima Diallo. For the first time in weeks, Musa felt uncertainty creep into his chest. Meanwhile, at the warehouse, the phone rang. Mamadou rushed to answer it. Yes, this is SAR Logistics. He listened for a moment, then his eyebrows lifted. Oh, yeah, of course. After hanging up, he turned toward Fanta with confusion written across his face. That was the law firm. Fanta's heart skipped, and they withdrew the claim. She blinked. What they said after reviewing new information: Ndiaye Construction Group will not pursue legal action. Fanta stared at him. Just like that, yes. Mamadou shook his head in disbelief. I don't understand. But Fanta did. She grabbed her phone and immediately called Ibrahima. He answered after 2 rings. Hello. The lawsuit is gone, she said. I know. You know, yes. Fanta sat down slowly. What exactly did you send them information? Ibrahima. Yes. You're not just some man running errands, are you? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Come to the harbor tonight, he said quietly. Why, because it's time you heard the full story. That evening, the port of Dakar shimmered under the fading light of sunset. Cargo ships rested quietly in the distance, while cranes stood tall like steel skeletons against the orange sky. Fanta walked along the waterfront until she saw Ibrahima Diallo standing near the railing. He wore the same simple clothes she had always seen him in, but somehow in that moment he seemed different, more confident, more powerful. She approached slowly. You stopped the lawsuit. Yes, how by reminding Musa, who he was actually challenging. Fanta crossed her arms. Then maybe you should finally explain who you really are. Ibrahima looked out at the ocean for a moment before answering. I was born in Dakar, he began quietly. But most of my business life happened outside Senegal. What kind of business investment? Fanta frowned. In what ports? Logistics, infrastructure. Her mind began connecting pieces. You're saying? Yes, he said gently. I own the company that controls half the shipping contracts moving through this harbor. Fanta stared at him. You're serious? Yes. And you never told me I didn't think it mattered. Fanta laughed in disbelief. You're a major business tycoon and you married me without mentioning it. I married you because of who you are, he said calmly. Not because of my position. She shook her head slowly. So all this time, you were hiding I was living quietly, Why Ibrahima's expression softened. Because sometimes the only way to know people's true character is when they believe you have nothing. Fanta thought about the night of her humiliation, the quiet man offering her a bottle of water while everyone else laughed. And suddenly everything made sense. You were watching. Yes. And you saw everything. Yes. Fanta looked back toward the harbor lights reflecting across the water. You could have stopped Musa any time. I could have, but you didn't. No. Why? Ibrahima turned toward her. Because I wanted to see who you would become when the world turned against you. Fanta met his gaze, and a small smile appeared on his face. You became stronger. In the distance, the lights of Dakar began to glow across the coastline. And for the first time, Fanta fully understood the truth about the quiet man she had married. But the city had not yet heard that truth. And when it finally did, the consequences would shake far more than one broken engagement. The harbor lights of Dakar shimmered across the dark water like scattered gold. For several minutes, after Ibrahima Diallo revealed the truth, Fanta Cisse said nothing. She simply stood beside the railing, listening to the distant hum of cargo ships and the rhythmic splash of waves against the dock. A business tycoon. The word still felt unreal. The quiet man who had shared cheap coffee with her at a roadside cafe. The man who carried bread in paper bags and walked through the port like any other worker, was actually the owner of one of the largest logistics investment networks in West Africa. Fanta finally exhaled slowly. You really hid this well. Ibrahima smiled faintly. That was the point. She turned to face him fully. How long have you been living like this? Almost a year. Why? Ibrahima leaned against the railing, his eyes reflecting the harbor lights. Because success can attract the wrong people. Fanta raised an eyebrow. And poverty attracts the right ones. Sometimes, he said quietly. She thought about the night of the engagement party, how strangers had laughed, how her own family had chosen reputation over loyalty, and how one quiet man had simply handed her a bottle of water. You were testing people. Not exactly, Ibrahima replied. I was observing. Fanta crossed her arms. And what did you observe about me that you didn't break? She shook her head. Oh, I broke. Yes, he said gently. But you stood up again. The words settled softly in the night air. Fanta looked down at the dark water below. You know, she said after a moment, most people would be angry if their spouse hid something this big. I know. But strangely, I'm not. Ibrahima studied her face carefully. You're not. No. Why? Because when I had nothing, she said quietly, you treated me like I still mattered. He didn't respond immediately, but the quiet gratitude in his eyes said enough. While the harbor held its peaceful silence, another part of Dakar was far less calm. Inside his luxury penthouse overlooking the Atlantic, Moussa Ndiaye paced across the polished marble floor with a glass of whiskey in his hand. The documents from the law firm lay open on the table. At the top of the page, the name still burned in his mind. Ibrahima Diallo, Diallo Strategic Holdings. Musa slammed the glass onto the table. How did I miss this? Across the room, Fanta Cisse watched him carefully. You're sure it's the same man? Yes. The one who married Fanta. Yes, Fanta frowned slightly. But he didn't look rich. Musa laughed bitterly. That's the problem. Men like him don't need to look rich. Fanta walked closer. So what does this mean? Musa stared out toward the ocean. It means we picked a fight with someone far more powerful than we realized. Fanta folded her arms. You always said power is everything. Yes. And now Musa's jaw tightened.
Now we find out how much power he really has.
The following morning, tension spread quickly through Dakar's business circles. Rumors began circulating quietly. Someone had heard that Diallo Strategic Holdings had intervened in a legal dispute involving a small logistics warehouse. Someone else whispered that Ibrahima Diallo himself had signed the response letter. And slowly, people began connecting the story to something even more shocking. The same Ibrahima Diallo had recently married Fanta Cisse, the woman publicly humiliated by Moussa Ndiaye months earlier. By midday, whispers had reached Mamadou's warehouse. One of the drivers rushed into the office holding his phone. "Madame Fanta, people are talking about your husband." Fanta looked up from her paperwork. "What about him? They say he's very important." Mamadou leaned forward. "How important?" The driver swallowed. "They say he owns several shipping companies." Fanta closed the folder slowly. "Yes," she said calmly. "That's true." Mamadou blinked. "You knew, yes. And you didn't tell me. It wasn't my story to tell." Mamadou leaned back in his chair. "I thought he was just helping us out of kindness." Fanta smiled faintly. "He was." The warehouse owner shook his head in amazement. "I've been drinking coffee with one of the most powerful businessmen in the region, and didn't even realize it." Fanta laughed softly. "That seems to happen often with him." But the growing rumors did not stop there. By evening, several business news blogs began posting short articles. "Mystery marriage connects Dakar business rivalries." "Diallo Strategic Holdings linked to legal dispute with NDI Construction." The story spread quickly across social media, and inevitably, it reached the attention of people who had once laughed at Fanta's humiliation. In the family compound, Ibrahima Cisse sat frozen in front of her phone while reading the headlines. "This cannot be true," she whispered. Across the room, Awa paced nervously. "Everyone is talking about it." Ibrahima looked up. "You knew that man," No, Awa said quickly. "But he married your sister. Awa stopped walking. I thought he was poor." Mariama's voice trembled. And now, neither of them answered. Because both women understood what this meant. The daughter they had treated as an embarrassment was now connected to a man far more powerful than Moussa Ndiaye. That night, Fanta returned home to find Ibrahima sitting quietly on the balcony. The city lights glittered across the harbor beyond the buildings. "You've caused quite a storm today," she said. Ibrahima smiled slightly. "I didn't intend to. But people are talking. They always do." Fanta sat beside him. "My family knows now." And silence. Ibrahima nodded. "That's usually the first reaction." Fanta looked toward the distant ocean. "You know what's strange? What I thought justice would feel loud. Instead, it feels quiet." Ibrahima considered that for a moment. Real justice often is. They sat in silence for a while. Then Fanta asked softly, "What will Musa do now?" Ibrahima's gaze turned thoughtful. "He will probably try one last move." "What kind of move?" "The kind desperate men make when they realize their power is fading." Fanta frowned slightly. "And if he does?" Ibrahima's expression remained calm. "Then we'll finish this story properly." The confidence in his voice sent a calm certainty through Fanta's chest, because the final chapter of this conflict had not yet arrived. And when it did, the truth about power, pride, and justice in Dakar would be revealed in front of everyone who had once believed Fanta Cisse was the weakest person in the room. In Dakar, power rarely changed hands quietly. By the end of the week, whispers about Ibrahima Diallo had grown into full conversations across the city's business circles. Executives spoke about him during private dinners. Port managers mentioned his name during meetings. Even small traders at the harbor discussed the strange story of the powerful investor who had been living quietly among ordinary workers. But the most uncomfortable conversations were happening inside the offices of Ndiaye Construction Group. For the first time in years, Moussa Ndiaye felt something he had almost forgotten. Pressure. Inside his glass-walled conference room overlooking the city skyline, Musa sat with his legal team while several board members listened carefully. "You told us the lawsuit was a simple matter," one board member said calmly. "It was," Musa replied, "until Diallo Strategic Holdings became involved." Musa's jaw tightened. Another board member leaned forward. "You understand the implications, don't you?" "Yes. Diallo controls several port distribution channels," the man continued. "If he chooses to redirect those contracts away from us—" The sentence didn't need finishing. Everyone in the room understood. The construction industry depended heavily on logistics, and logistics in West Africa was one of the sectors where Ibrahima Diallo's investment network quietly dominated. Musa leaned back in his chair, forcing himself to remain calm. "We are not powerless." "No," the board member agreed, "but we must be careful." The lawyer spoke again. His letter was very precise. Musa glanced at the document lying on the table. "He's trying to intimidate us." "Perhaps," or perhaps the lawyer added carefully, "he's simply reminding us that this situation could escalate." Silence filled the room. Finally, one of the older board members spoke. "Tell me something, Musa." "Yes. Why exactly did this conflict begin?" Musa hesitated. The real answer, his broken engagement with Fanta Cisse, sounded embarrassingly personal in a room full of business executives. "It was a misunderstanding," he said. The older man nodded slowly. "A misunderstanding that now threatens the company." Musa said nothing. For the first time he realized the situation had grown larger than his personal pride. Meanwhile, across the city, life at Mamadou Sarr's warehouse had taken on a strange new energy. Drivers moved with excitement. Clients called more frequently. Even suppliers who had ignored the warehouse before were suddenly interested in new contracts. One afternoon, Mamadou approached Fanta holding a clipboard. "You realize what's happening, right? What people know who your husband is." Fanta sighed softly. "Yes, and they want to work with us." She nodded. "That's business." Mamadou laughed. 3 months ago, we were barely surviving. Now we're expanding." Fanta glanced around the warehouse. Crates moved quickly through organized rows. Workers followed the schedules she had created. Trucks departed on time. For the first time since the engagement scandal, she felt something close to pride. Not the pride of wealth, the pride of rebuilding. Still, she knew the situation with Musa wasn't finished. Powerful men rarely accepted defeat quietly. That evening, Fanta returned home to find Ibrahima Diallo on the balcony again, watching the harbor. The orange glow of sunset stretched across the water. "You've been busy today," she said. "Meetings," he replied. "With who? Shipping partners." Fanta leaned on the railing beside him. "You didn't tell them to pressure Musa, did you?" Ibrahima glanced at her. "No, but you could." "Yes, why didn't you?" He looked out toward the ocean. "Because destroying someone completely rarely teaches the right lesson." Fanta studied him. "You're surprisingly merciful." "Not merciful," he corrected. "Strategic." She laughed softly. "That sounds more like a businessman." Ibrahima smiled faintly. "And what do you think Musa will do now?" Fanta asked. "He'll try to regain control." "How? Public reputation." Fanta frowned. "You think he'll try to embarrass me again?" "Possibly." The idea didn't frighten her the way it once had. Instead, it sparked determination. "If he does," she said quietly, "I won't run away this time." Ibrahima nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what I expected." 2 days later, Musa made his move. A large charity gala took place at one of Dakar's most prestigious hotels, a gathering of business leaders, politicians, and investors, raising funds for coastal infrastructure development. Musa had helped organize the event months earlier, and he knew exactly who would attend, including Ibrahima Diallo. Inside the grand ballroom, cameras flashed while guests in elegant clothing mingled beneath crystal chandeliers. Near the entrance, whispers began spreading through the crowd. That's him, Diallo, and that's the woman he married. Fanta Cisse stepped into the room, beside her husband wearing a simple but elegant navy dress. Unlike the engagement party months earlier, she walked with steady confidence. No shame, no hesitation, just quiet dignity. Across the room, Musa watched their arrival. For a moment, his expression remained unreadable. Then he approached them. The surrounding conversations softened as people sensed tension building. Monsieur Diallo Musa said smoothly. Ibrahima nodded politely. Monsieur Ndiaye. Their handshake lasted only a second. Musa turned toward Fanta. Madame Diallo, he said with a faint smile. Fanta met his gaze calmly. Monsieur Ndiaye. Several guests nearby pretended not to watch. Musa spoke again. I hope there are no hard feelings about the past. Fanta's voice remained steady. The past already revealed everything it needed to. A flicker of irritation crossed Musa's face, but he quickly recovered. Well, he said, I wish you happiness. Ibrahima answered before Fanta could speak. As we wish you wisdom. The subtle edge in the words did not go unnoticed. For a brief moment, the three of them stood in silence beneath the ballroom lights. Then Musa stepped back. The confrontation was over, but the message had been delivered. Everyone in that room now understood something clearly. The woman once humiliated at an engagement party now stood beside one of the most powerful businessmen in the region, and she was no longer someone anyone could dismiss. Later that night, as the gala ended and guests began leaving, Fanta turned to Ibrahima. That felt different. How like the story changed. Ibrahima smiled. Because it did. She looked around the grand ballroom one last time. Months earlier, a room like this had witnessed her humiliation. Tonight, it had witnessed her dignity. And though the world was only beginning to understand the full truth of her journey, the final chapter of justice was already approaching. The night after the charity gala, Dakar seemed quieter than usual. From the balcony of their small apartment near the harbor, Fanta Cisse watched the distant lights of ships moving slowly across the dark Atlantic horizon. The ocean breeze carried the smell of salt and diesel from the port below. For a long moment, she simply stood there thinking about how much had changed. Months earlier, she had stood in a ballroom surrounded by laughter and humiliation. Now she stood beside a man who had quietly protected her, without ever asking her to become someone else. Behind her, the balcony door slid open softly. Ibrahima Diallo stepped outside with 2 cups of tea. You're thinking again, he said. Fanta smiled slightly. I do that sometimes. He handed her a cup and leaned beside her against the railing. What are you thinking about? How strange life can be. That's true. 6 months ago, she continued. I thought losing Musa meant losing my entire future. And now I realize it might have saved it. Ibrahima nodded slowly. Pain has a way of revealing truth. Fanta looked at him carefully. You knew that already, didn't you? Yes, she studied his face. You've lived through betrayal too. For a moment, Ibrahima didn't answer. Then he spoke quietly. Years ago, when my company first became successful, I trusted the wrong partners. They cared about money, not loyalty. What happened? They tried to force me out of my own company. Fanta frowned. But you're still the owner. Yes, he said with a faint smile. Because eventually the truth came out. She nodded thoughtfully. So you understand what it feels like to be betrayed. Very well. Fanta looked back toward the harbor lights. I think that's why we understood each other. Before Ibrahima could respond, Fanta's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen. The name surprised her. Moussa Ndiaye, her mother. Fanta hesitated before answering. Hello. For several seconds there was only silence on the other end. Then Mariama's voice spoke softly. Fanta, are you well? Yes, I heard about the gala. Fanta waited. Mariama sighed. People are talking about your husband everywhere. I know. Another pause followed. Finally, her mother said something she had never said before. I misjudged you. Fanta's chest tightened slightly. You chose dignity when we asked you to choose silence. Fanta looked down at the floor. Mama, I'm sorry. The words felt heavy with years of pride and regret. Fanta closed her eyes briefly. I appreciate that, Mariama continued. Awa also wishes to speak with you. Fanta hesitated, but this time the anger she once felt toward her sister had softened. Maybe someday, she said gently. That would mean a lot. After the call ended, Fanta remained quiet. Ibrahima looked at her. Family, yes, and they're beginning to understand. He nodded. Sometimes it takes time. Across the city, Moussa Ndiaye sat alone in his office. The view of Dakar's skyline stretched beyond the glass windows, but tonight, the city lights felt distant. The charity gala had changed everything. In one evening, the entire business community had seen something Musa could no longer hide. He was no longer the most powerful man in the room, and the woman he once believed he had discarded now stood beside someone whose influence reached far beyond his own. His phone buzzed with a message from one of his board members. We need to discuss the company's direction. Call tomorrow. Musa stared at the message for a long moment. For the first time in years, he understood what it felt like to lose control. Back at the harbor apartment, Fanta finished her tea. You know something, she said. What I'm glad our wedding was small. Ibrahima smiled. Why, because it was real. She looked at him. Everything else in my life before that felt like performance. Life often becomes performance when people chase status, he said. Fanta nodded. But with you, I don't feel that pressure. That's the point. She laughed softly. You're very wise for someone who pretended to be poor. I didn't pretend, he corrected gently. I simply removed the noise around my life. Fanta tilted her head. And what did you discover while living quietly? Ibrahima looked at her. That the most valuable things in life cannot be purchased, such as integrity, trust, and sometimes, he added, unexpected love. Fanta smiled warmly. The city lights shimmered across the harbor as ships moved slowly toward distant ports. For the first time in many months, she felt complete peace. Not the kind of peace that came from winning, but the kind that came from knowing she had remained true to herself even when the world tried to break her. Months later, the transformation became clear to everyone. Mamadou Sarr's warehouse expanded into a thriving logistics company, managing contracts with several major shipping partners. Fanta oversaw operations with the same quiet determination that had carried her through her darkest days. Meanwhile, Diallo Strategic Holdings continued growing across West Africa, but its founder still preferred walking through the harbor without security whenever he visited Dakar. And often, when workers greeted him respectfully, he simply nodded like any ordinary man. One afternoon, as Fanta watched trucks leaving the warehouse yard, Mamadou walked beside her. You know something, he said. What if Musa hadn't betrayed you? None of this would exist. Fanta considered that carefully. Yes, she admitted. But I don't thank him for it. Mamadou laughed. Fair enough. She looked out across the harbor where cranes lifted containers beneath the bright African sun. Life had taken her through humiliation, loss, and unexpected love. And in the end, the lesson was simpler than she once imagined. True strength was not about wealth, it was about character, because the people who remain kind when they have nothing often become the ones who deserve everything. Life has a strange way of testing people before revealing their true destiny. Sometimes betrayal feels like the end of the story. Sometimes humiliation feels like a permanent scar. But as Fanta Cisse's journey reminds us, The moments that break us can also become the moments that rebuild us. Her sister took her wealthy fiancé. Her family told her to remain silent. Her reputation collapsed overnight. Yet instead of allowing bitterness to define her life, Fanta chose dignity. She stood up again. She rebuilt her path with patience, courage, and quiet determination. And in doing so, she discovered something powerful. The right people will recognize your worth, even when the world refuses to see it. Sometimes the person who changes your life is not the one with the loudest voice or the brightest spotlight. Sometimes it's the quiet person standing near the doorway, the one who offers kindness when everyone else laughs.
If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Fanta's place? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more emotional stories about resilience, justice, and unexpected destiny. Because somewhere out there another powerful story is waiting to be told.